Bridging Gaps, the business podcast with Deborah Levitt, sharing the challenges and stories of fellow business owners. Hello and welcome. Today I've got Nikki Faulkner with me from Mulberry Consulting. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, it's really good to be with you.
I'm really pleased to have you on today. How are you?
Really good, thanks, and really excited about telling you a little bit about what I do.
Well, that's a great lead-in to asking you, what do you do? So what does Mulberry Consulting do?
Well, we really fill a niche that's somewhere between business consulting and HR consulting. So I'm not an HR consultant. I have a line that I don't cross when it starts getting towards the legal things. But also as a business consultant, most business consultants will look at the entire business, whereas I try to focus totally on the people part of the business and make sure that's working really well, because once you are working with people, obviously you're relying on them to do a certain amount of the work for you to bring your business on and move it forward.
So when you go into a company, what would you be? How would somebody know that they could benefit from having you there to assist them? What would be the signs that they need Nikki?
So I've got sort of, I guess, three areas that are really key for me. So one would be the small business that maybe has only maybe 4 or 5 employees, and they're probably the first team that business owner's had from starting the business on their own. So that business owner is very good at doing whatever the business does, but they may not have much experience in managing people. And often the point I go in is where they've hired some people, it hasn't worked out very well. They've probably got rid of most of those people. Either the people have left themselves or they've had to get rid of them. And they're at the back where they're kind of essentially starting again. And at that point, they've convinced themselves that they actually don't know what they're doing. And at that point, they're ready to work with somebody like me to actually help them come in and put some structure processes, help them build the consistency, help them learn to communicate well with their team, and help them build the right team in the first place. So we do a lot of work around what kind of people they even want to have on board. So not just focusing on whatever technical skill they're going to bring, which is what people normally focus on, but that plus what other things will help them fit well into that particular business, which is usually the part that they haven't got right. And then making sure around that they've got all the structures and processes so that they can actually do things consistently, they're doing the right things, they're making sure they have all the right conversations and making sure that all the right sort of expectations are set so that everybody knows what they're doing. Because I think when you've been working on your own, you have all those conversations in your own head, but you're not used to actually communicating fully to somebody else. And what you think is a full conversation with somebody else may not be what they've interpreted at their end to the same point. So that's one set. The next set I work with is people that are probably somewhere between 10 to 15 employees. So they've had their first growth spurt. They've somehow managed to get it to that point, but they themselves would agree that they don't have any training. They don't quite know how they managed it, but there they are. So that's great. But they're now trying to put probably a bunch of investment in to grow quicker again, and they're going to need to take on a whole bunch more people, and they're probably starting to put their first layer of management in. So they're not going to be the people actually managing the people below them, but they're not comfortable that the skills they have are at a level that they could actually pass it on to somebody else. So they've managed somehow themselves, but they're not sure they could teach that to the next people that need to take over, if you like.
And are they acknowledging that they don't think they have the skills, or are they encountering problems and they don't necessarily know that they're the problem?
Both. So sometimes they're acknowledging they just don't know, and they're lacking confidence that because they're not quite sure how they've got to where they did and what it specifically they've done has made it work. They're not quite sure that they're the best people to start setting up things in place. And they're also not sure that the processes they currently have are going to scale up if they've got to do things quickly. So, they might have managed to get to 10 to 15 employees, but if it's been quite slow and they've been quite lucky about who they've hired, so maybe they've been doing the right things, but they don't know that they've done it, they're just a little bit worried that if they start trying to do this on a bigger scale, it's all going to go horribly wrong. And yet, obviously, at that point, it's quite critical that it doesn't go horribly wrong. And also, often they've got some really good people that they want to retain. And part of the strategy to retain them is to actually give them this managerial position. But again, you can't just drop a technical person into a managerial role and expect that they're going to do great, especially, again, when it's a very pivotal moment for your business. So again, with those people, I would work with the actual business owner and with whoever is going to be promoted or brought into those positions, so that we can make sure that they have the soft skills they need, but also that they have all the processes in place they need, so that between them, again, they can do things consistently, doing the right things, and know that it will scale up because it's all been set up like properly and with the right thought behind it, so that you understand why you're doing things as much as what you're doing. And then the third set of people I've been working with a lot recently is actually those one-man bands who have decided they don't want to go down the path of employees, but they have to have a team of people to support them. So they might have technical people to do specific projects, or they might have virtual assistants or virtual HR or whatever, or use an IT company as an outsourced source of support. And those people, for me, although you have to be very careful, obviously, in this day and age, legally, what language you use when you're working with these people, so you don't take a freelancer and suddenly convert them into a worker. That comes with all sorts of legal requirements. But a lot of it's about just the same types of things you would do with employees in terms of conversations and setting expectations you would still want to do with those freelancers. So again, making sure they're the right people that will fit with you, so that they share your values and they're actually going to help you drive your business forward, even if you're only using them for a project here and a project there. And making sure that you have the right conversations, like up front, to set the scene that says, this is how we work in this business. Like, if we're out with customers, we don't wear jeans, or when we write, we don't use emojis everywhere, but just something that says something about this is us, this is who we are, this is our culture. And if you're supporting us, working with us, whatever, you're going to need to fit in with that. And on top of that, obviously very specific goals around what the project is that we're asking you to do, so that you know what good and finished are. So even if you're not telling somebody what hours to work to get it done or how they need to do it, you're basically saying, let's be very, very clear up front what good looks like and what finished looks like, so that, again, we don't have problems down the line. And those are the same conversations you'd have with an employee, but a lot of people don't think about it when they're working with a team of freelancers. So those are the three groups.
Okay, no, that's excellent. And I think that people generally, when you were talking about what good and done means, I think people don't generally actually think about that. We tend to assume that my vision of good and done is clearly what everybody else has understood. And we don't necessarily realize until we get to done that actually there's a problem, because somebody else's done isn't mine. So really having those conversations is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that, again, when you've been working on your own, or if you work with freelancers, it just doesn't occur to you that people haven't interpreted your message the way you expected them to. So one of the things I do with a lot of people is say, always question. If you've given somebody some instruction, you don't just give it and leave it and hope for the best. Ask them to tell you back what it was you've asked them to do, because it becomes very quickly clear if they've interpreted some part of your message as more important than you wanted it to be, or less important, or whatever. And it just allows you to say, hang on a minute, before we start working, let me just clarify a few things. Because it's very difficult, like I say, when you have the conversations in your own head, if you haven't got it quite right, you naturally say, that isn't quite what I was looking for. And you just keep working on it until it is what you're looking for. But you don't realize the conversations you're having internally to make that happen. And when you're working with somebody else, obviously you have to have all of those conversations externally, otherwise you don't really get the message across.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always found too that when somebody, you're listening to somebody and you've explained, they've explained something to you and you hear it and you go, yeah, I understand that. But then it's when you try and explain it either to somebody else or back to them that you realize that you don't. So it's not that we're lying or trying to hide a lack of understanding. It's that we believe we've understood it.
Yeah.
And then it's only in that feedback that you go, oh, actually, shoot, hang on, I can't explain this. And what does that mean? So I think it's a really valid point to make sure that people are feeding back to you to confirm that they've understood.
And one of the other things I do working with my clients on the back of what you've just said is we work a lot off templates that I've established as a basis, so that when I've explained to somebody, how or why we're going to set up some process, they've got something to start with. Because again, it's very easy to say, these are the steps you're going to follow to do this. But if you do that with a blank sheet of paper in front of you, it can be very difficult, like you say, you suddenly think, well, it made sense when she said it, but now you're making me sit here and do it. I don't quite know where to start, even though I thought it was obvious. So by giving people sort of like those little stepping stones along the way, it's the quicker way to help businesses make that sort of step forward without them having to sit there thinking, oh shit, I haven't done it because I don't quite know where to start. So it's like, well, it's easy. We'll start here and then we'll take it forward, because now all you've got to do is think about how this would work for you, try it, we amend it if it doesn't work quite the way you wanted it to, but you're not starting from zero, you're starting from that sort of first step, which does makes it much faster to get going with something that is going to work.
And as you say, it's always easier to start with something rather than a blank sheet of paper, especially if it's something that you're feeling is challenging to do for yourself. So, somebody who's not naturally writing things down or putting processes in place is, potentially going to find that difficult.
Yes.
So, Nikki, you come from, a completely different background. You've got, I think, a PhD in geophysics and have taken this journey to get you to where you are today. How did you find those transitions in terms of moving from your original, role and area of work into more of the people management, and then the transition to being your own company, to coming out of that corporate environment and setting up your own business?
Well, for me, actually, it all happened so naturally that I wouldn't have said I even noticed. Like, looking back today, I'm like, they were massive transitions, but I didn't notice at the time as being transitions at all. So initially, when I started out in geophysics, in fact, this morning I was just doing a little bit of tidying and I came across the papers that I wrote when I came out of doing my PhD. And I mean, I look at them now and I don't even understand what they mean, and I wrote them. So, I mean, I've moved so far, it's just unbelievable even to me. But I started off, when I came into the corporate world, I started off as a technical support person, and I was supporting a piece of software that I'd used for my PhD. So I was using it as a geophysicist, which is what it was designed for. So that bit was kind of natural. I'd used it for 5 years. It made sense that that company hired me because I actually knew how to use it. And in fact, I knew how to push it to its boundaries, because in my PhD, I wasn't quite using it for what it was designed for. So I used to talk to their technical support team before I became part of it to find out how to make it do things it wasn't designed to do. So it was a very natural place for me to start in the corporate world, because it was something I already knew how to do. But once I joined the technical support team, I very quickly was given the responsibility to look after a project for, basically, we were audited every year on quality processes around technical support. And I was given that project, I don't know why, because I'd only been there about 3 weeks, so they can't have known that much about me, but I was given it and I ran with it. And it was actually a really pivotal point for me, because being involved in that audit program for probably about 12, 13 years, I learned an awful lot from the audits about how to look at the processes we were using, how to look at the people management side of it. And it was, a lot of times they'd say, do you do this, that, and the other? And we'd say, oh, yes, we do, or we don't. And then they'd say, well, a company that does this really well does whatever. And so then you'd go back and say, oh, let's see if we can do that. So it really helped me as I developed. Every year we'd get some feedback that you'd be able to use and actually do something with to make the processes more efficient, more effective, or at least take an idea another company had used and say, well, okay, we can't use it exactly like that, but maybe we can do something similar because we understand what the point they're trying to get to was. So having taken on this project, it wasn't long before I became a team leader, where I was doing the technical work, but I was also starting to have some responsibility for a few people. Then I got promoted to be the manager for that team. Initially, I was only given the UK to look after, which was great, but it wasn't too long before I actually was looking after the Europe, Middle East, Africa. I was one of 4 global managers. So that all happened very naturally. And again, it was partly by having the support of being part of this audit program, working very closely with my co-managers around the rest of the world to try and build processes. And we were actually trying to build a global team. So we were trying to work together to make sure those processes were all the same, so that no matter where you were in the world as a customer, you'd get the same experience wherever you called in for your technical support. So basically, I built up a really good team. We did lots of work about how to recruit and find people that fit. And I was way ahead of the curve for the company, because I remember one of the last things I did before I left was went on their talent management course, where they were doing all the things that I'd been doing for years. So that's always quite nice when you think, yes, we were doing it right. But again, a lot of that came out of this audit program, because they were saying, well, have you thought about this and have you tried that? So it was a really good place for me to learn how to manage a team well. But because we were such a big company, if I made the odd little mistake, it wasn't going to bring the company down. And obviously what I can do now is help people not make those mistakes when it's actually much more critical, because it's a much smaller business. So the last role I had in corporate, I was actually moved to a different business unit where they actually had people out on oil rigs. It was a very, very different environment from working in technical support. And I was moved there purely because I knew how to manage people, and I was very good at all of those sides of things. And they'd seen that, and they said, we want you to go and sort this business unit out, because they really aren't very good with their people. And if you can go and bring any of the stuff you've had in this other business unit to these guys, it'll be fantastic. So essentially, Mulberry Bush Consulting now does all the things that I used to do in that business unit. So it was a great practice ground, if you like, for me to go and work out what it is new managers, because essentially in that world it was new managers rather than business owners, but again, people without management experience who are suddenly responsible for running a business unit in some part of the country, often in deepest, darkest Africa, where they didn't get much support, helping them make sure they had all the bits in place so that they could do it really well. And again, these guys were very good at what they did. They could go and put fluids down the well in an oil rig standing on their heads, but could they hire the right people? Probably not, because nobody ever stopped to tell them what they needed to think about. So all of the things that I put together in that role are essentially what's come out to become Mulberry Bush Consulting. So when I was given an opportunity to basically come out with a bit of cash, because the oil industry goes up and down, I thought, actually, this is my opportunity, because I've got all the bits I need to be able to go and do something I've always wanted to do. And that's when I set Mulberry Bush Consulting up. So essentially, the only difference for me now from that last role is, rather than having clients given to me, which I did in the corporate world, they had no choice but to work with me. Now, obviously, I have to go and find my clients. But for me, that's a bonus, because somebody that has to work with you and doesn't want to is very difficult to work with, and it's very difficult to make yourself feel that you're actually adding value when you can't get them to do anything because they're not interested. Whereas now it may be harder to find people, but the people I find, they want to work with me. And so we've had some fantastic results, because people realise that they want the help, they're ready to put the effort in, and we can do some really good work together. So it's been a really good transition. Although it's been a very long sort of strange journey, I wouldn't say any of it at any point did I feel I was making a massive step in a sideways direction. It all just happened naturally. And again, I could not have predicted being here when I had my PhD in geophysics, but life takes you where it takes you, and you sort of hang on to the bits you enjoy, and you sort of take them forward, and you just see where it goes. And this is where we've got to so far.
So have you found that people, whether they were on the oil rig, whether they were a new manager in deepest, darkest Africa, whether they were in the IT industry, or whether they're your clients today, have they all got the same challenges? Is it just a different environment, or do they have different challenges that they need help with depending on where they've come from?
I would say that the differences are more related to where so now it would be what stage their business is at, and obviously in corporate it's more what stage they as a person in their development was at, rather than the different industries and things. So really it's a question of, do you have any idea about people management, or are we literally starting at the beginning, so everything's about, let me explain why we need to do this? Or do you have a little bit of experience, so you kind of understand why, and you need to, but you're just not sure how? So those are the sort of two sets, but across different sectors, it's the same. I mean, managing people, it's about human interaction. So it doesn't really matter what kind of people they are. You've got to give them respect. You've got to understand that, the more communication you can have about stuff, and again, checking people have understood. Doesn't matter what the industry is. That bit's a human to human interaction. So it really doesn't change. So for me, it's more about understanding where the person is. So whether they have no idea and we're literally starting from nothing, in which case, obviously, there's just a lot more explanation, or whether people understand it and they just want to get on with it, but they don't know how to start or where to start.
And have you ever come across anybody who, in realizing that they were the doer, they were the one who had this specific skill set and they're really good at it, is now evolving their business, is becoming, that growing business that you've mentioned, and realizes that actually not necessarily that they can't be a good manager, but that they don't want to be a manager, that they still want to be the doer. So is there ever that situation where somebody is coming to the conclusion that actually what I need is to hire a manager, and I'm going to continue doing the bit that I'm, really expert at and I really enjoy?
Yes, but I would say that the people, I've not met very many of them, because I think most people have also, you get to a point, even when you do love what you're doing, you kind of need a change. So actually they are kind of willing to step back a bit and do something slightly different. I have got a couple of people that I've been in conversation with who are not yet ready to make that commitment, and they're kind of acknowledging that themselves, in that they are trying to step back and run the business, but it's not really they're not really enjoying that side, and what they really like to do is get out and be involved, especially with their really big, important customers. So as part of that is a trust issue, that if they actually had their team working better, they would probably feel more comfortable letting it go to somebody else, because some of that's just they're not quite ready to let go of the really big customers in case it all goes wrong. But some of that is also, I can help people up to a point to put things in place to say, well, we can put team leaders in, so you don't need to have to manage every step of everything. But again, at some point, until you're ready to say, I'm ready to let go, there's only so much someone can do to help you. And I mean, that's true for any kind of thing, isn't it, really? You have to make the decision that you want to change before someone can help you. And in those situations, like I say, there are various things we can do to help in the interim, to make sure the company's still running the best way it can. But at the end of the day, they are at some point going to have to make that decision, and then they're going to have to decide where to go. So far, the people I've met have not really, they've all still gone with the view that ultimately they are going to be running it themselves and they will relinquish the doing. I haven't come across anybody yet who said, I'm seriously looking at hiring somebody to manage me, because I think at the end of the day, again, when you've been doing it yourself, half the reason you set up the business is because you probably worked for someone in the past and you didn't like working for someone and you wanted to work for yourself. So putting yourself and your whole business in that position is very difficult for people. So typically we have that sort of interim patch where they're not going to go that way. They're still not quite ready to relinquish everything, but it's about saying, well, okay, there are other ways we can do this where everything isn't relying on you, and therefore if you're not there to do it because you're busy actually doing some doing, everything's going to be stalled while we wait for you to come back and do something managerial.
Yeah, and it's quite difficult when you are the doer and you like doing the doing to put that priority where it needs to be in terms of going back, so as you say, it's got to wait until you come back and are ready to do it. So just going to the transition of when you started up Mulberry Bush Consulting, how did you find that? Because I know a lot of people come out of corporate and they're all excited. Life's, wonderful. They've, got this new opportunity. They're not going to be reporting to anybody. And then they get quite a bit of a shock when they realize that actually there isn't somebody to call to fix your IT, and there isn't somebody to help you with, whatever else. So did you find that there were any challenges either immediately or as you progressed through since starting?
So I'd say there are areas that I already knew were probably going to be my weak areas. And again, I mean, when you're in corporate, you do get the opportunity to get involved in quite a lot of different areas of things. So, there were areas like around finance, which is often what people who set up their own business turn out to hate. I was actually like, I'm quite good with that. I've managed budgets. I understand how the companies work. I understand the profit and loss and all of that. So I can kind of cope with that. It may be ultimately something that I don't want to look after myself, but I'm actually quite comfortable with it. I'm confident about it and I'm not too worried. Marketing was an area that I didn't have a lot of experience with. So again, with a major thing being when you start a business, you've got to find clients. Obviously, that side of thing, marketing and sales, becomes quite important. So that was an area that I realised quite early on was not my area of expertise. So I did engage with people quickly to say, I'm going to need help as to just, you can attend all sorts of things and people tell you to try this and try that and try something else. But really, you need to kind of understand what sort of business you're running and then talk to somebody that knows, that can say, okay, seriously, to start off with, this is where you need to focus your efforts. So I've been quite realistic about what I can't do or what I don't know how to do, to engage people to sort of help me. And again, I wouldn't have said I'm engaging freelancers to do work for me, but it's been about in the initial phase of having coaches to help coach me through things that I don't know how to do, so that I'm still doing it, but I'm gaining the knowledge and the experience along the way.
And is there anything that you would recommend to people who are starting that you would say, actually, when you're starting a business, I really recommend that you do this?
So I'm a big planner. I'm very good with my time and I'm very good at organizations, basically what I bring to my clients, and I bring it to myself as well. So right from the beginning, I tried to build something that was quite well documented, so that if I wasn't going to be there to do it, I did want to palm something off to somebody else. It was going to be very easy to do. But I've also been very good about, so I have a 12-month plan, which sort of vaguely says this is what I'm going to try and achieve in the year, but I also break that down by month. So that each month I kind of see what I'm going to do. And at the end of the quarter, I'll look at it and say, okay, well, how are we going? Do we need to adjust things? And then I'm very good at scheduling things in the calendar by sort of like for the coming month, I will put things in the calendar that need to be done if I'm going to achieve those things. But I think one of the things I did learn is it's really, really easy to overestimate how much you can fit in a day. So you go in there and you fill all these things. It might be some of it's physically in the calendar. So you think, okay, the day's full. That's great. But it turns out something you thought was going to take an hour takes 5 days. So that was out right before you even started. Or worse, you put to-do lists together. Well, they don't have times allocated to them. So now if you've got a full day and you've got 20 things on a to-do list, those to-do list items aren't going to get a look in, especially when you've not even estimated the right amount of time for the thing. So I think it's about being very honest with yourself, and probably at the beginning, going with trying not to do very much each day until you actually get a real feel for how long things take. Because what I learned was things take an awful lot longer than I thought they were going to. And so now I'm much better at being able to say, if I'm going to put together a direct marketing campaign, I'm seriously going to need 5 full days to do all the bits and pieces that need to go with that. Now, I can't believe it takes me 5 full days, but it does. And I've timed it, and I've, enough times I've done it that I'm like, that's how long it takes to actually physically do it. Now, again, if I was also then going to farm that out to somebody else to do, I can also be honest to say, well, it takes me 5 days, so I'm expecting it'll take you about 5 days. If it takes you 14 days, then I'm paying you too much because it shouldn't take you 14 days. So it's actually very valuable, but it's very important to sort of be aware of that as you go, because it's very easy to keep shoving things in and then people want some other things, or someone gives you another idea and before you know it, you've added 6 more things to your list of things you're going to do. So it's about keeping your priorities straight and being realistic about how much you can actually achieve, because for me, part of the point of starting the business was not to be working 20-hour days. Now, I could do that quite easily, but that's kind of part of what you're trying to get out of from big corporate, is obviously often having some long hours and things like that. So it's about being really realistic about what you can achieve and whether they're the right things to be working on.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And that realistic, I always think that if I think something's going to take an hour, then it's better to allow 3. And if it turns out that it did take an hour, then I've got an extra 2 hours to do something else, which, I can take something else off the list to do. But I think a lot of time people are, they're taking that initial estimate, they're having that massive list of things to do, and then they really get hit and are feeling down, or that they're not very good. Because they haven't achieved it. But the reality is that they never had any hope of achieving it.
Yeah.
So you're beating yourself up over something that you couldn't achieve. So yeah, realism and being kind to yourself, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually that's one of probably the biggest things, is the being kind to yourself. When you're part of a bigger organization, it isn't all about you. Whereas when it is just you, you've got to realize that there'll be good and bad days. There'll be days where things didn't go the way you want, or you made a horrible mistake that, no one died, hopefully. Assuming no one died, then, actually, does it matter? What did you learn? It's more important to think in those times, well, what have I learned and what would I do differently next time, than to sit there actually thinking, oh my God, that was awful, I'm a complete failure, which is very easy to do when you're having a bit of a bad moment. And you can have a bad day just because, or you can have a bad day because of something that's happened in the business, and you can't predict it, you can't control it, but all you can do is, it's the way you react to it, I guess, is what makes a difference. And I think when you are on your own, it's about having some sort of support structure, not friends and family, which is important, but you need a support structure within the business of people that you can go and talk to, that understand your challenges, so that you're not also bringing all of your doom and gloom to everybody that's outside of your business, because they don't want to hear it, but also people that really understand, they've been there themselves. So you have a little network. It doesn't need to be a large number of people, but just a few key people that if you're having a really bad day, you can call them up and they can help remind you that actually, yes, you're really good at what you do. And it might not look like that today, but keep going, don't worry about it, and move on.
And how do you, how did you actually manage to set that network up? Because again, a lot of people coming out of an environment where everybody else is in a job, is a family, or a friend, a family member or a friend. So getting to know those type of people who do understand and who can help you might not be something that is already set up for you. So how did you establish that network for yourself?
There was for me, it kind of came on 2 branches. So I actively went out and started networking. And I would say that probably, I have had some business that's come out of networking, but I wouldn't say that's predominantly the way I get business. So I mostly, I think I do the networking for my own to find, well, sometimes it's to find suppliers, people that will help me do things when I need them. But a lot of it's around building those relationships with people where, you go from going to a networking meeting where everybody's telling you how great their business is, to having some one-to-ones where you really decide that you've got a connection with this person, and then the honesty comes, and then you're both like, well, actually it's not quite as great as I'm making out when I go to the networking meeting, but I'm not going to a networking meeting and telling everybody it's gone horribly wrong. So it's about those moments where you say, yeah, today was a really bad day, but I couldn't tell anybody that, but let's have a chat about it one-to-one, because we trust each other. So they came out from those. Now obviously you don't go to your first networking meeting and suddenly bond with 5 great people, but it's about finding the right sort of groups that have the right sort of people, and it's just about finding people that connect with you. The other thing I did, I cycle. I'm not as crazy as Anne that you interviewed. I don't do triathlons. I just do the cycling part. But so I belong to a cycling club, and it's quite a large, quite social cycling club. And I actually realised that although I used to go out with them every Sunday, I would probably just talk to a couple of people I knew, and I'd mostly not talk to anybody. I'd just focus on the cycling. And I suddenly realised that there was this huge group of people out there, many people who do run their own businesses, but I'd never thought of it in those terms. So it's even about taking a network you already have, but thinking about it slightly differently to say, actually, if I start having conversations less about cycling and more about the world in general, you actually end up making connections there as well, which are equally beneficial because they're not friends and family, and they a lot of them have sort of switched into the business world as well once you realize that somebody runs their own business like you do. But if you've never had that conversation, you don't know. So I think it's just about being prepared to go out there and have those conversations and find the people that sort of get it and that get you, because it's about the people.
Yeah, and it is absolutely key that you're not going to be best buddies with everybody, and finding the people that you connect to and that you can have those open discussions with is really important. And I know for myself, I've done it probably in a similar way through networking, and then as getting to know certain people more, realizing that they are people that I can speak to, and we can have those discussions and support one another. So you essentially have your water cooler moments, yes, but they're more virtual, and with people in different businesses rather than people in your same company.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of, you were saying about the cycling, you were saying about, not wanting to work 20 hours a week. How do you look after your mental well-being and your well-being generally to make sure that you are having that rounded life rather than just focusing on the business side?
So for me, cycling is the thing I do to get away from it all. And I'm quite a competitive person, which is something I've had to put slightly aside with the business, because, again, you don't want to try and be competitive you want your business to be competitive, but it's no good trying to compete with every other business owner you meet, because that just doesn't work. Cycling's the same. There are a lot of people that do it competitively, like Anne does her things competitively. For me, it's the one thing I don't do competitively. So it has to be, for me, it's to take me when the weather's appropriate. I'm very fussy about the weather. Then it's to actually get me out and enjoy the scenery that we have around here. But a lot of it is around the exercise, just to make sure I'm tired enough that I can sleep, so that I don't wake up in the middle of the night and start thinking about things that I don't want to think about in the middle of the night. So for me, we're lucky enough that we have our bikes on turbo trainers in the house, so we can actually exercise all through the winter. I think I've done probably more than 1,000 kilometers already since January, so we're lucky like that. But for me, a lot of it is at the end of my work day, I sort of decide roughly when that's going to be, within probably a couple of hour window, depending on the day. But generally, I will actually just go through a process before I switch my laptop off, where I actually think about positive things that have happened, things I'm grateful for, those sorts of things, just to get my mind in a view that even if the day's been a bit rubbish, there's got to be something I can find that I achieved. What did I do today? What did I achieve? Even if it's small, there's got to be something I've achieved, and that helps me finish the work day in a way where I can say, okay, I'm kind of comfortable with that. I usually know exactly what's in the calendar for tomorrow. So again, I'm not thinking, have I suddenly got to worry about I'm supposed to be going somewhere first thing? I know whether I've got to get up early or I haven't. And then from then on, I usually get on the bike. So that's my finishing my little sort of gratitude thing, and then getting on the bike is where I shut off. And then I try not to do anything business related after that. And that allows me to get the exercise in. It allows me to completely switch off my mind from what I'm doing. It allows me to have kind of closed the day, and then I get my evening to myself, which works really well for me. So.
And I really like the idea of having that gratitude bit, that actually it might have been a completely rubbish day, but if I now look back at it, I can see, actually, I did this, or this happened and that was good. And again, going back to the beating ourselves up, it's really easy to focus on the negative. So I think taking an active decision to look for the positive is a great tip for people.
Yeah, and it's something I would never have done in the corporate world. It's something I've started to do since I started my business. And to be honest, I think if I didn't do that, I think I'd have probably been crying under the desk for the last several months. Because you have to, when you've come from quite a competitive environment, it's a very different mindset you have to have about how you're going to get yourself through when it is just you. There's no one else to rely on. There's no one else to go to, no one else to complain to. No one's going to promote you if you've done well. It's just you. So you've got to find a way to make that happen through the good and the bad. And like I say, there's always something you can find that's positive, even if it's not work related. Just something where sometimes you say, you know what, I'm working at home all day. It's snowing outside. I didn't have to leave the house. That's fantastic. All those poor people had to go and find a train and get down icy streets. And it doesn't matter what it is. There's always something you can find, even if you've got to dig a little bit to find it. But it makes a massive difference to me. And that combined with finishing the day with some exercise really helps me switch off.
And I know for myself that there was something a few weeks ago, actually it might even been a couple months ago now, where my morning had not started well, and I hadn't made it to where I was supposed to be because there'd been some problems. And I was talking to somebody else, sort of later, and they were going, how is everything? And I was like, oh, it's all, bad. And I suddenly stopped. I said, actually, because I was already partway there and then realized it wasn't going to happen, I actually went somewhere else, and I actually went for a walk around this little area, and there was lots of frost around, and I'd forgotten that I'd actually had this really lovely, however long it was, just going for a stroll, taking pictures, and just by having that conversation with them and getting them, them going, there must be something good. It suddenly came back, and I said, actually, yeah. So while all of that went wrong, it turned into this really good thing, and I've kind of forgotten the good thing.
Yeah.
So,
and it's very easy to do when you've got other stuff going on. So again, for me, it doesn't have to be work related, although it's great if it can be a work related thing, because that makes you leave the day even more positive. But if it isn't, there's always something in life. So it's all about just trying to make sure you get that sorted.
Yes, exactly. And finding it is important. So Mulberry Bush Consulting. Why a mulberry bush?
Well, basically, it's kind of a not very exciting story, but our house is called Mulberry House, and we moved into it probably about 6 months before I started the company, and we were looking for a company name that potentially I would use, but potentially also my husband might use if he wanted to do consulting work himself. It wouldn't be related to what I did, but we just thought if we gave it a generic enough name, it wouldn't really matter what kind of consulting it got used for in the future. And then it ended up getting branded, and it obviously kind of is what it is now. And to be fair, he hasn't suggested he wants to do any consulting for a while, so it probably will stay as it is. But ultimately, it was kind of there as more as a holding company overall, but it's just sort of morphed into what it is now. So basically, most people recognize the little pink tree and relate it to the people management. So, and
where do you want to take the business in the future? I know that you've said there's 3 different types of clients that you're currently working with. What's your focus going forward?
I really like to work with the people that have employees. Like I say, I'm getting involved with people that work with freelancers, but I think for me, my core is really about the people that do have teams of employees. I think the areas at the levels they are may well stay the same, because the way the program I run is set up, it doesn't really matter. We work at whatever level the business is at and what it needs. What I'd probably like to do ultimately is license the program that I have, to be able to license it so other people can deliver it in other areas. We do actually deliver the main 6-month program that I offer remotely. So theoretically, at the moment, I could offer it to anybody anywhere anyway. But I think the way things are structured, it would be very easy to license it and have other people who've come from a similar background with similar experience be able to offer something. Again, it's very structured in terms of the program, but the actual work you do with the client is very, very flexible and very obviously set up to be exactly what they need for their situation. So I think it's a very well designed program that you could license and people could use, to help anybody at any stage in the business development.
And when you go into a client, do you do an initial assessment or review to find out exactly what it is that they need and how they then progress through those steps, or is it or are they dictating what it is that they want to achieve?
So usually for most people, the way it works is that the first thing they would do, so I have a 7-step system, and step 1 is what we call the intensive day. And what we do in that is they get a workbook to complete before we get together, where they basically give me a lot of information about their business, what challenges they're facing, and they also rate a whole series of people management related things to see how they think they're doing on scales of 1 to 10. Then we do the day. In the morning, we focus on what they've written down. So we do the deep dive into their business. We talk about when they say they're a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, we talk about, well, what did they think that 3 was? And then we sort of talk about some different ideas about things they have tried or haven't tried or whatever else. And then in the afternoon, what we do is we take whatever they've decided the top 3 things are they think they want to do first that will have the biggest impact for them. And we actually do an hour on each. So we actually do something on that day to get them started. So obviously they're essentially dictating what they want to work on. Now, what they came in thinking they might want to work on may end up being different after we've had the morning's conversation. So again, once we've had that conversation, people can become a bit clearer about maybe what is the most important thing or what will be the quick win for them or make the most difference. If that's all they need to kind of kickstart them, that's great. But if not, then steps 2 to 6 are the 6-month program. And we do a whole series of things in there where, again, it's little bits of training so people understand why. They get to do very guided assignments that helps them put their business into the process. And then we have meetings to make sure we can kind of pull that together to something that will work for them. And then we often have a lot of conversation about how they're going to roll that out, because it's all very well to build a process, but it's another thing to show up one day and say, here guys, we've set goals for you. Goals weren't something you had, and suddenly you walk in and you've got goals, and there's a lot of people thinking, oh, what's going on here? We're not really sure we like this. So a lot of it's around the conversations you need to have to explain to the team why certain things are going to be happening and how it's going to benefit them and the company. And then for those people that want, step 7 is an ongoing mentoring program after that 6 months. So the 6 months kind of gets you everything you need to be really fully up and running for where you are now. But again, if you want that holding hand going forward, or if your business is evolving quite quickly, then obviously the mentoring would make sure we can kind of revisit everything we've put in place and make sure it's keeping up with where the business is.
That's excellent. And how do most people, do you find that people coming into it, even though they've approached you, is there ever resistance? So do you find that sometimes you can see that this really should be the priority, that this is really the crux of the problems, but they're going, oh no, it's over here and I want to focus on this. Is that ever a situation?
Not usually. So usually the way we look at it is I have 3 kind of key topics. So recruitment, induction, and performance management. And so where we start in those 3, usually we're in agreement in, because it's normally slightly smaller that people are not in necessary. And in the course of then going through the structure, it will come out in the logical order. Because again, when we're talking about recruitment, we don't start by saying, well, let's start by writing interview questions. We start by saying, well, let's think about your business. What's the values? What's the culture? So there's a logical order you kind of have to go through anyway. And so even if somebody thought that this was going to be crucially important, or I think it is and they don't, in the end, if we've decided that actually recruitment is the thing we need to focus on first, it will all come out in the wash, which means you don't kind of have to have those conversations, because it makes sense. Once you start it, sometimes people say, oh, no, I don't want to worry about my values and culture. And it's like, well, if we don't, then the whole series of things aren't going to work. And you can't, so there are times we have to say, just humour me. We'll just do this exercise, and you'll see that it'll be valuable going forwards. And to be honest, even at that stage, if you get people to do it, normally those are light bulb moments anyway, when people say, oh, actually, I've never, I didn't really want to do it, as you know, but that was really valuable because I've never really stopped to think about it. And it's like, that's why we do it. So I would say it's not really massive conflict, but sometimes it's just sort of, I do have the humour me moments. Just humour me, we'll just do this. We'll just spend 10 minutes on it. And then once people get into it, they realise that actually this is actually, they can see where it's going, and then they're like, okay, I'm kind of with it. But in terms of big topics, normally, I mean, I've had people that have basically come to me because they've lost all their staff and they've started over. So they've just hired people, because they didn't quite start with me before they'd hired people. And they were like, we don't want to do recruitment first because we've just recruited and we don't want you to tell us we've done it wrong. Which I wouldn't do, but I totally get where they're coming from. If I'm suddenly saying this is the process that we really should follow, and you think, oh God, that's just not what I did it all upside down, back to front, it doesn't kind of make you feel great about yourself. So in that situation, we'll say, you know what, an ideal place to start then is induction, because you've got these new guys, so let's start them on it, and that way we can use it almost as a checklist to make sure that anything you think you've told them that you haven't gets caught, we can use them to give their input. What haven't we told you that you would have liked to know? So, and then we'll come back to recruitment at the end, because realistically, hopefully, if we get these next bits right, you won't lose these people, and it won't matter that we've done recruitment at the end. So sometimes it's just taking people's sensitivities into account, given where they are and what they've just been through. But at the end of the day, over the 6 months, they get everything anyway. So it really, really doesn't matter.
So that's really interesting to hear about, Nikki, and to hear about some of the ways that you approach things and taking into account people's sensitivities, because I can fully understand that if I've just employed, X number of people and you're going, well, you shouldn't have done it that way, I'm not really going to want to continue sort of looking and thinking, okay, well, that's a great start. So as you say,
I mean, I don't go in and say, I wouldn't have done it that way. But even as soon as you start saying, well, yeah, the ideal way to do the process would be to start with this, and you think, well, I know I didn't start with that, then right from the it just plants the seeds of doubt that you've hired the wrong people, and you maybe haven't. Right? There's nothing to say that because you hired them in a different way that they are the wrong people. But given that your track record probably is that you've already lost a bunch of people, chances are they're not the right people, but we can still salvage it if we get onto the performance management and we set them good goals. There's a good chance that we can salvage it anyway.
Yeah, it's putting that effort into those people to get them to where you need them to be and where they want to be. So Nikki, thank you very much for coming on. It's been really interesting talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. You've been listening to Deborah Levitt on Bridging Gaps, the Business Podcast.